Hello and welcome. This is Michael Beach, and you are dialed into the What Are You Doing podcast. This is the show for thought leaders who are investing in the next generation of leadership for their organization. This is also the show for emerging leaders who want to become that next generation of great leaders. Together, we can develop leaders who will, in turn, develop more leaders and end up making a big difference in this economy and in our world. All of us at Michael Beach Coaching and Consulting are excited to be able to bring you another podcast episode. We consider ourselves very fortunate indeed to be engaged in the business of contributing to the success of forward-thinking, fast-growth companies. We're so grateful to be able to help them to develop and cultivate great leaders at all levels of their companies because it's really rewarding and meaningful work. We're thrilled that our work often leads to results that make a difference for those companies and maybe even more importantly for the families that make their living in those companies. We are beyond excited today because we've got the opportunity to introduce you to today's special guest, my friend and an outstanding emerging leader in his own right, Mike Tibaudo. Mike is an enterprise account executive with ZoomInfo in the Boston, Massachusetts market. Mike, welcome. Great to have you with us today.
Mike, thanks so much for having me. It's definitely an honor. I was very excited waking up this morning to have a chance to catch up with you and talk a little bit about sales leadership and emerging sales leadership, which is probably the bucket I fall into. So thanks so much for the opportunity.
Well, it's great to have you with us, Mike. Can't wait to hear what you got to tell our listeners. So let's start out. Let's get them going. Mike, do me a favor. Tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your career.
Sure. So right now, as you mentioned, I'm an enterprise account executive at ZoomInfo. We're the global leader and provider of business intelligence and go-to-market automation. Just a really fun, exciting, fast-paced culture. We IPO'd a few months ago. But prior to joining ZoomInfo, and I joined in part because I was a customer running a sales organization. I worked at Winslow Technology Group for 5 years. We sold IT solutions from servers, networking, storage to hyperconverged, IT security. And the 5 years prior to that, I worked at EMC Corporation before they became Dell Technologies. So a lot of IT data center related sales, couple opportunities in inside sales and outside sales to manage. And today I'm in that world at ZoomInfo.
Awesome. Well, I would imagine with as many hip and well-informed listeners as we have on this podcast, a lot of them probably know something about ZoomInfo, but for anybody who might not be familiar with your company, tell us a little bit about ZoomInfo.
Sure. I mentioned we're the leader in business intelligence, but also go-to-market automation. So intelligence is things like contact information for business professionals. What's their mobile phone in a world where landlines are going into empty offices during this pandemic? What kind of technologies are they using, applications? And really, we help people figure out the right people to call if you're in sales or marketing with the right information and an avenue of communication, but also what to say. How to stand out and have a unique impact statement when you do get that person on the phone. And then the automation part comes in consolidating and collapsing a stack, right? If you think of the data center industry, they went through a notion of hyperconvergence, right? Storage, server, networking, consolidating into one. If you have an email automation platform, an auto dialer, you're using different tools to look at company data versus contact data. We help customers collapse that all into a single platform that, again, is a global leader, which leads to significantly lower costs and a much higher ROI. And a super exciting field to be in as someone who's been in various sales roles before to now be on the other side of the fence, helping other sales leaders and marketers get to their number.
That's terrific. That's right up your alley, man. I can see why you're excited to be with ZoomInfo. Yeah. So, Mike, how important are core values at ZoomInfo?
Core values are very, very important at ZoomInfo. It's part of why I ended up there. And that can be values for me personally, can be things like professional values, how you have a work hard, play hard kind of culture and environment. It can be values of teamwork. It can dip into personal values like having good morals and outreaching to the community, especially over the last 7 or 8 months, which I've seen ZoomInfo do a tremendous job with. And then maybe the most important value is that open multi-directional, omnidirectional, really communication from leadership down to us, what's happening, and from us as individual contributors, frontline managers, executive, all the way up, right? The communication is superb. And I think that helps tie all the values together so we're all on the same page.
That sounds outstanding. Glad to hear that ZoomInfo is making core values really resonate with the organization. Now, you mentioned earlier that you've been a manager for a significant amount of your career up to this point, and that I would imagine you're probably going to end up being a manager and a leader again one day. Think about when you were managing and leading, when you were recruiting leaders to your organization, what were some of the characteristics and traits you'd be looking for when you were looking to hire somebody?
Yeah, absolutely. Two things come to mind, Mike. First and foremost, a passion to lead. And what I mean by that is if you've ever helped someone, was it more exciting for you when they achieved their goal than when you did it yourself? So an example in sales is, do you get more excited when you help someone else out and they got that purchase order in finally and you were cheering for them, excited for them, or are you more excited when you get yourself? And I love POs either way, right? But I think I learned early on that it's a little more exciting and fulfilling for me personally anyways, to get someone else to help them find a PO. And then I think the other thing to look for, which is super important, is just if you want to be a leader, you have to have an intangible ability and willingness to learn and learn and evolve too, right? You have to learn about yourself. You have to learn about your product line. You have to learn about your company, your industry, and how all those things tie together. And you have to be able to learn how to orchestrate that so you can produce the best results possible for your company, but for your team and for each individual rep within that team too. And when you're looking for leaders, if they don't have that at least willingness to learn and evolve, let alone the ability to do it themselves, right, then I don't know if they're going to be cut out for management or produce the results that you're looking for.
Makes perfect sense. Mike, I know that you're pretty interested in being a student of leadership. How did you become involved in developing leaders?
That's a great question, Mike. Believe it or not, there's this thing called the Leaders Club, and it's an organization through the YMCAs, and I believe it still exists. And I joined that when I was just a kid. I was in high school, and for the first time, I had someone step into my life that was an immediate family and became a mentor. I had a bunch through that organization, but one that sticks out is Bobby Benedict, and he pointed out to me how fortunate I was for the upbringing I had, the resources I had, the opportunities I had in front of me. And he showed me how to give that back to other people and other communities. And as a result, he was developing me as a leader, but I also started to look for other leaders too, people to help me with a project or to help me reach out to someone. And that kind of continued on through college. And when I got into the quote unquote real world and the actual career of my own, I quickly saw similar patterns, except my mentors had kind of shifted from personal relationships and mentors to professional in the work world. But those trends were the same, that kind of willingness and calling and urge to help others transpires through the other leaders that you're looking for and developing, whether you realize you're recruiting those people into your life and into your professional world or not. It just kind of happens and continues to happen cyclically.
The Leaders Club. Wow, sounds like a really fantastic program. So I'm going to send a little shout out to Bobby Benedict. Bobby, if you ever hear this podcast, I want you to know something. You've had a tremendous positive ripple effect. Mike Tibaudo is well on the way to becoming a great leader, thanks to you getting him started. So tip of the cap to you, Bobby Benedict, wherever you are. Well, Mike, did you have any other leadership mentors along the way who made a big impression or a big investment in you, like Mr. Benedict?
Yeah, I'd say the first leader or mentor that I really had would probably be my dad. He gave me this book, How to Influence Without Authority, when I was first thinking about getting into management. And then that quickly led to probably the first really genuine professional mentor of my career, which was Jason Romsey at EMC Corporation. He was the first person to really believe that me, Mike Tibaudo, could be a salesperson. I was just a kid running numbers and operations, and I loved working hard, and I loved the sales process and how it worked. But he was the first person to really pull me aside and say, hey, I think you might want to look down the hall where all the salespeople work. And he was also taking a role in a promotion to go run a large chunk of our inside sales organization, which at the time and still today has a phenomenal reputation as one of the best inside sales development programs in the world. And Jason took a chance on me when I was a professional. But I also think it was those early learnings from Bobby and from my dad of taking a step back and understanding people, how to build relationships. And that's a lot of what that Influence Without Authority book was about. And the other book he gave me was It's Your Ship, when I first became a manager. I don't know if you've ever read that. It's phenomenal. It's about a former Navy captain. Oh, right. It's amazing. That, for me, Mike, that really helped me understand what a leader has to do, not what they should be doing, in making it your team's goal, your team's ship or world or life or culture, environment, whatever word you want to use. They have to understand, not just think it's theirs, but really own it and be on the same page. And that's where you have incredible results. And I've seen that firsthand by following those kind of principles. So I'm glad you've seen it too. I'm not surprised you have. It's an incredible book.
I would agree. It is an incredible book. And I'm going to give a shout out to my friend Dave Tovson, who I met in a networking group about 8 years ago. He had read the book and knew that I was engaged in the business of developing leaders. And so he asked me, if I'd ever read that book. And I said, no, I've never even heard of it. So he gifted it to me and I read it and I found it just an amazing book because, the story for the listeners who've maybe never read the book is this guy gets promoted to a leadership position on a vessel in the United States Navy. And it's kind of like McHale's Navy. It's a mess. The ship is, a dumpster fire. And he treats everyone in the Navy with respect and dignity, and he demands discipline and attention to detail. He puts some structure in place, and lo and behold, the ship starts to become the pride of the American naval force. So, hell of a story. Just really fantastic. Well, let's ask one more question before we go to break. I've got to imagine, Mike, that a dynamic leader like yourself has got to continually invest in yourself to keep becoming a better leader. Can you tell everybody out there about what you're doing right now to raise the level of your leadership game at the moment?
Sure. I think I'm doing something a little bit differently right now than I have my entire career and life. I mean, I'm a big believer in educating yourself, sharpening the sword, read books, read excerpts if you can't read the whole book. If you can't read the excerpt, read a blog, just constantly learn and do what you need to develop, because that's never going to end, right? However, this world has flipped upside down in the last 7 or 8 months, right? And everyone's in a completely different but upside down situation. And right now, I've found that the best thing I can do to invest in myself as a leader is to invest balance into my life. So I've worked a ton of hours since, this pandemic started, as we all have, right? But I've also been able to have lunch with my wife and kids every single day. And I would never get to do that before now. And I try to focus on that and be in that moment when I'm there. And if I have to hop online at, 5 or 6 a.m. because I have a call with someone over in Europe, or 6 or 7 p.m. because there's a call with someone maybe in Australia, it doesn't really matter. I can't change the world we live in and where we're working from and being from home or not. But what I can change is how I'm investing in myself. And right now it's balance. I can go take a call and come back upstairs and still have time to tuck the kids into bed or whatever. So I think the result is we are constantly evolving and learning. And I've learned over the years that it's not just investing, going to conferences or reading or mentoring or being mentored, but sometimes you have to readjust and rebalance things so you can be the best version of yourself. And I think that's really where I'm focused on right now, particularly as I'm about 6 or 7 months into a role that's still relatively new too. I think it all comes together quite well when you take a step back and put your priorities in a new perspective in this new world we're all living in.
Okay. Thank you, Mike, for those insights. That's great. We're going to take a very short break for a word from our sponsor. We'll be right back in 30 seconds. What are you doing to develop the next generation of leaders for your company? If I told you that in 12 to 24 months, we could prepare your next generation of leaders for greatness, would you be intrigued? A majority of today's businesses promote from within to develop new managers and leaders to fuel their future growth. Here at Michael Beach Coaching and Consulting, we've built our Emerging Leaders Development Program so that it guarantees your success. Our coaching philosophy is to outfit each emerging leader so that they can proactively and confidently solve business problems and anticipate the future on their own. Call us today at 520-732-2266 to arrange for a no-cost, no-obligation discovery conversation with one of our master coaches. All right, we're back with Mike Tibaudo. Mike, great stuff. We're having a blast interviewing you. My next question for you is this. As you're developing leaders in an organization where you're managing and leading, have you come to some conclusions about maybe 2 or 3 changes that an aspiring leader can make to improve their leadership skills based on your experience?
Absolutely, Mike. The first and foremost thing that comes to mind is that concept of the super rep. I've been guilty of it. I see it in young aspiring leaders. I see it in veterans. I see it in people that have been leading for 30, 40 years. And that concept, if listeners aren't familiar with it, is you're the rep and you've had tons of success and you're hitting your numbers consistently and you get promoted or whatever happens, and all of a sudden you're in a situation where you're in a leadership role and you can choose to go try to make every person that works for you do the job exactly as you did, because that's what you know, right? The same approach, the same process, right? Everything. Or you can make the decision to try to understand what motivates all of your employees. How do they tick? What are they good at? What do they care to be good at? What are they bad at? And what do they not care at all if they're bad at, right? Because those are the things you need to understand, because nobody's the same. And if we're trying to manage everyone the same way, we're just diminishing our results. But if instead I can look at every single person on our team, or if I was coaching up a new leader and telling them, look at the individuals on your team and try to calibrate, try to hone in on what you need to do differently as their leader to bring the very best out of them, to help jump on that journey to greatness with them, instead of just barking or demanding that they do it exactly how you did. Because A, nobody's the same, but B, as soon as you step out of that individual contributor role, you're no longer the expert. You're a manager, and your reps are going to be closer to the deals, closer to the customers, closer to the streets and what's happening. And you need their expertise, and you can only pull that out if you're really, truly enabling them versus just trying to get them to be carbon copies of what you were when you were a rep.
Outstanding advice. Nothing quite like being a situational leader and adjusting on the fly to whatever your followers are going to need. You've obviously invested a lot of time and energy in yourself over the years, Mike, as you're on your path to becoming a great leader. Can you identify for us the best single leadership development investment you've ever made in yourself?
Emotional intelligence. Just Googling that is worth so much for your career, whether you're a leader or not. You can be an accountant, and I'll pick on that because I have a friend in accounting and financing who I speak to about emotional intelligence in the past, and it applies to everyone. But it is critical for you to understand what emotional intelligence is and how it comes into play with your interactions and your relationships. Otherwise, you're just not going to succeed in being a good leader. You might be somewhat effective, you might hit numbers, but you're not going to get the most out of your people, and you're certainly not going to get the most out of yourself without understanding a little bit about emotional intelligence, what your emotional quotient is, where your emotional blind spots are, and where your strengths are too, so you can hone in on that. But ultimately, emotional intelligence, in my opinion, gives you the awareness, but also the vehicle to connect who you are with other people, so you can produce the best results possible. And I think that's something you have to keep reinvesting in yourself over and over and over again.
Fantastic, Mike. I'm like you, a big proponent of emotional intelligence. I've been in business long enough to see people ruin their careers with a lack of emotional intelligence. And I've been in business long enough to see people really start to get on the fast track and thrive because they made a commitment to grow their emotional intelligence. I'm pretty convinced that it is the great differentiator. If you want to be a great leader, I just don't think you can do it without being in touch with your emotional intelligence. I
agree.
Strongly agree with you, my friend. I think emotional intelligence is absolutely critical. Have you noticed any particular obstacles or barriers that the people that have been your followers have tended to get slowed down by or get stuck behind?
Yeah, comfort with emotional intelligence. It can be a little awkward, Mike. You got to really look in the mirror and have someone really kind of guide and coach you through who you are. And sometimes you might not like what you see, but at least your eyes are open, right? So the first time I did a personality test, I, like most people, assumed I'd be X and I was Y, and then I kept taking them and I kept getting results back. But the more you take a step back and reflect and remove yourself and your self-perceptions out of the way, those are going to be the biggest obstacles. Plus, once you've gone through that humbling process of really understanding where you're at, it brings a certain amount of credibility, right, genuity, when you're trying to connect with someone else. If you haven't looked in the mirror, you can't go ask someone else whether they work for you or not to look in the mirror themselves, right? That's not going to work, because you're not going to be able to effectively coach them, because you're not coming from an area where you understand how to coach from, right? So I think the biggest thing folks can do if they're concerned about leadership in general or trying to understand how to grow and develop is go jump into something like emotional intelligence and see what you have to work with, and be excited that you got the hardest part of that journey out of the way.
Well, there you go, listeners. There is some tremendous leadership advice from Mike Tibaudo. I think that's really a nugget of gold if you're paying attention. Mike, what's the greatest leadership advice anybody has ever given you?
It was simple. I think it was in like a management training class back at EMC, and they said your job is to empower, not be empower. And we've probably talked about this a couple of different ways today in the show, but again, you want to empower your people. It makes their lives more fulfilling, their jobs more fulfilling, their results will be superior. You're not supposed to just be in charge and be in power and yell and demand things. That's just not going to work. But I'd say what I've learned over time, which is significantly more valuable, a mentor of mine, Linda Conley, had this concept of you always have to know your stack rank. Where do you stand in your priorities of your career, your financial situation, and your work-life balance? And what I've done over time is I've realized that can be my own vehicle to communicate with my reps or my direct reports or my managers or whoever. And if I can share with them, here's my priorities, they're going to understand me better, but they're also going to want to connect with me more and really tell me what their priorities are, instead of just telling me I'm here to work hard and make money. Everyone's going to say that, but what really motivates you? 3 pieces of paper across the table. Where do you put your career, your finances, your work-life balance, and how do we take that formula, because they're all okay, whatever combination, and optimize your day-to-day so that we can get to the best results at the best possible time. So it started as a tiny little, very simple piece of advice, but when I thought of that and applied it to that mentorship from Linda Conley and her concept of the stack rank, it really evolved over time to something that I've had a conversation with anyone who's ever worked for me can certainly tell you that Tibaudo is always talking about that stack rank, but I certainly think it helped accelerate the relationship building and therefore the results that we were able to get together. Fantastic.
Thank you, Linda Connolly, wherever you are. Your contribution to Mr. Tibaudo has been noted. Mike, what would you like to recommend to our listeners about investing in others to help them develop so that they can become great leaders one day?
Drive the action and the activity. The best mentors I've had wouldn't let me just meet with them and then run away for 3 months or 6 months or whatever. They wouldn't just let me have a call or sit down, scribble down a bunch of stuff on paper and check a box and say, hey, I learned, I've mentored, I've been invested in, right? The best mentors I've had, whether the folks I mentioned or Mike, you coached myself and our leadership team at a company I worked at for several years. You wouldn't let me just talk to you. You'd send me a follow-up. There would be an excerpt that was relevant to the conversation we had. Or I had a manager that I was struggling with objections. I walked out of his office, and before I got back to my desk, my phone was ringing. It was him. And he said, let's practice it again, right? You have to drive the activity and really invest yourself into the process of the person that you're mentoring so you can help them make sure that, A, they get to the destination, but they're really going to the right destination too. Because often course changes as you get involved in mentoring people.
So the action, the follow-up between conversations is where a lot of the magic happens. Makes perfect sense to me. Makes perfect sense to me. All right, Mike, my final question for you. I know over the years you've had a pretty terrific record of developing high-performing teams when you've been in management positions. I'd like to hear your thoughts about teamwork and collaboration in the workplace. Any observations that you'd like to share?
Mike, I've never joined a team or led a team that didn't start with some kind of an internal competition or unnecessary competitiveness, right? That kind of chippiness. And maybe that's because I'm a product of a career mostly in sales and we're ultra competitive. There's a lot of, do whatever you have to win kind of mentality. But I think the best cultures and the best teams and organizations, and certainly the best leaders I've seen, they come in right away and they try to dismantle any of that infighting or inner competition, level the playing field, and then start working with every single individual, understanding how they work and building everyone up evenly as a team. And that's when things like communication and best practice sharing starts happening. That's where things like synergies, where the sum is greater than the sum of the parts is greater than the whole, and you have natural team leads, right? That stuff just kind of doesn't happen automatically. It happens when you break down the barriers and you start building up a team as a whole collectively. And unfortunately, it's just something that always exists. But also, fortunately, it's something that with a good leader can quickly be resolved and turn into a positive.
Wonderful. Mike, I'm sorry. I do want to ask you one more question. I forgot I wanted to ask you this one. You've spent about 2/3 of your career in management roles. Do you have any plans to return to management again someday?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm passionate. I think I've always been passionate about leadership. I know right now I have an incredible opportunity. It's been a lot of fun learning to be a rep again, learning how to hit your own individual numbers again, and certainly learning an industry and a platform that's relatively new to me. However, I think leadership is, not to be too cheesy, but I do think it's a calling. And it's just one of those callings where, maybe you can silence it a couple times, but it's only going to get louder and louder until you answer the phone. And it's fun closing deals right now, but someday when I've mastered my craft and I've earned that opportunity, I'd love to lead again. But I think you have to be incredibly passionate about your product, your industry, and the people you work for in order to be the very best leader you can be. And you have to be the very best leader you can be if you're going to get the best results from your people and make them the best versions of themselves. So hopefully that happens again someday, Mike, and I look forward to that.
I have every confidence that it's going to happen again one day. I've got this ability to see people's potential, and I think there's a tremendous amount of leadership potential in you, Mr. Tibaudo. Well, that's our episode for today, leaders. I want to thank our special guest, Mike Tibaudo with ZoomInfo, who joined us today from the Beantown up in Massachusetts. Thank you, Mike, for sharing your insights and your stories with our What Are You Doing listeners. We appreciate your contribution to our program, and we appreciate your contribution to our listeners' ongoing success. Our next episode is going to be released soon. We've had a blast today, listeners. Thank you for joining us. Please reach out to us at info@michaelbeachcoach.com. If you've got a great suggestion for a future episode guest, or perhaps you would like to become a featured guest yourself, we'd love to have you. We'll look forward to our next episode and seeing you all again. Until then, remember, start working to become the person you've always wanted to become by investing in yourself and investing in your team. Believe in yourself and believe the best about everybody you work with, and things are going to turn out great. Thanks again to Mike Tibaudo, and we'll see you next time.